Hi Reddit. I, 30 female, could use some perspective on a pretty sensitive situation that's been brewing. My life has always been split between two worlds, the US and Australia. I'm a dual citizen, with my dad being American and my mom being Australian. Growing up, I was part of an international custody agreement where I would spend time between my parents' countries. From age 12 to 17, I'd split my time pretty evenly between them, bouncing back and forth every few months. The idea was that this would give me a balanced upbringing, letting me experience both cultures and connecting me to my mother's side of the family as well as my dad's. As part of this arrangement, my final year of school was to be completed in Australia, so I could take part in cultural activities with my mom's family. But life doesn't always go as planned. When I was around 15 or 16, during one of my stints in the US, I had a boyfriend. We were young, naive, and thought we knew everything about love and life. That relationship ended up being more than just a teenage fling because I fell pregnant. I didn't realize I was pregnant until I was back in Australia, and when I found out, I was terrified. I was young, in a completely different country, and had no idea how to handle it. When I finally worked up the courage to tell my mom, she was shocked but supportive. After some difficult conversations, both my mom and dad decided that the best thing for me was to stay put in Australia until I was legally an adult. They took my passport so I wouldn't make any rash decisions, and they rallied around me to help me navigate this difficult time. They helped me through every step of the way, allowing me to focus on school while preparing to become a mom myself. Eventually, I made a phone call to my ex-boyfriend in the US, who I'll call Jake for the sake of simplicity. Jake and I were young, and while I wasn't expecting him to be thrilled, I thought he'd at least want to know about his child. But things didn't go as I'd hoped. When I told him, he was, let's just say, less than supportive. In fact, he was cruel. He called my unborn child a half-breed and used other racially insensitive terms that I won't repeat. He made it clear he had no interest in being involved in any way, shape, or form. We broke up over the phone, and that was the last real conversation we had. Over the next several years, Jake kept his distance. He never made any attempt to reach out, nor did he try to meet his daughter. His family backed him up on this, saying that it was better for him to move on so he wouldn't ruin his life. They saw him as too young to take on the responsibility, and in their eyes, distancing himself from us was the best solution. He never contributed financially, never checked in, never showed any sign that he even remembered she existed. It was clear that he wanted to erase that part of his life. When my daughter was 5, Jake voluntarily terminated his parental rights. At that point, I had moved on as well. I'd met my now husband, who embraced both my daughter and me with open arms. Eventually, he adopted her, and she considers him to be her father. We've told her age-appropriate things about her biological background, and she knows she has a different biological father, but hasn't shown much interest in him, probably because she has a strong, loving father figure in her life already. For years, we heard nothing from Jake. It was as if he had disappeared completely. Then, a few weeks ago, I received a message from a mutual friend in the US, updating me on something I never saw coming. Apparently, Jake had been in an accident about a year ago, and as a result, he recently found out that he can no longer father biological children. Now, he's been asking around, trying to get in touch with me. He's reached out to mutual friends, asking them for my contact information, saying things like he deserves to have biological children, and that he wants to reconnect with his daughter. No one has given him my contact information, and I trust my friends not to. But it's unsettling. He's gone years without showing any interest in her life, and now he wants back in, seemingly because he sees her as his only chance at a biological connection. It feels like she's his second choice, a backup plan now that he can't have kids of his own. My daughter isn't a backup plan, and I don't want her feeling like one. I'll admit, I do feel some empathy for him. Finding out that he's infertile must be a hard pill to swallow. But I can't shake the feeling that his interest in my daughter is entirely selfish. He made his choice a long time ago when he terminated his rights, and he wasn't even forced into it. He voluntarily walked away, wanting nothing to do with her. He never asked how she was doing, never sent a single birthday card or note. He chose to live as if she didn't exist, and now he suddenly wants a relationship? I know I could tell him no outright and keep our lives separate, but I also wonder if I'm being unfair by not even considering his side. Maybe he's changed. Maybe he regrets his choices. But then again, is it my responsibility, or my daughter's, to give him a second chance? She's in a good place now, happy and loved, with a father who's been there through everything. Introducing Jake back into her life feels like opening the door to potential hurt and confusion. And I don't know if that's something I should risk for a man who's only reaching out now because he sees her as his last chance. My daughter doesn't know any of this yet, and I have no idea how she'd feel. She's at an age where identity and belonging are starting to mean more, but I've been careful with the information I share, hoping to protect her from the pain of knowing the things Jake once said. My husband has been an amazing father, and to her, he is her dad in every way that matters. I'm terrified that introducing Jake into her life would destabilize the family she feels secure in, all for someone who may not even stick around once the novelty of having a biological child wears off. So, Reddit, would I be the a-hole if I didn't allow her biological father to re-enter her life? This man has made his choices, and OP is right. OP's daughter isn't a backup plan. His sudden interest is selfish, and it sounds like he's not really thinking about what's best for her, but what's best for him. OP's protecting her from a potential source of hurt and should continue to stand her ground. And now let's hear the community's opinion. Not the a-hole. He voluntarily gave up his rights and showed no interest in her life until he found out he couldn't have children of his own. That's not love. That's entitlement. Your daughter deserves a stable, loving family, and from what you've said, she already has that. There's no need to let him disrupt that. Not the a-hole. The fact that he's using language like deserves to have biological children is a huge red flag. Your daughter isn't an object or a consolation prize for his infertility. If he truly cared, he would have been there from the beginning. You're doing the right thing by keeping your distance. Definitely not the a-hole. This man abandoned you and your daughter when you needed him most. He's only coming around now out of his own desperation, not because he cares about her. Your daughter's well-being is the priority, and you're right to protect her from someone who views her as a second choice. Update. Thank you all for the thoughtful responses. I truly appreciate the support and the perspectives that helped me process this situation. I took some time to reflect and spoke with my husband and a close family member, and I think I'm finally at peace with my decision. After discussing it further with my husband, I realized I'd been questioning myself too much. Jake made his decision, and he had every opportunity over the years to reach out if he'd wanted to. He's had my contact information through mutual friends, and there's been no shortage of ways to get in touch. But he chose to stay away, to keep his life separate, and in doing so, he forfeited the right to come back now simply because things didn't go the way he'd planned. To make things clear and set a final boundary, I reached out to a friend who knows Jake. I asked him to tell Jake, politely but firmly, that we're not interested in any contact and that I won't be sharing my daughter's information. I didn't go into detail. I just said that it wouldn't be in her best interest and that I hoped he'd understand. I felt that a clear message would hopefully prevent him from trying to push any further. In a twist, I received a message from Jake a few days later, despite my friend's attempts to communicate my wishes. He sent a long-winded email talking about how he's reflected on his past choices and how he deserves a chance to make things right. He mentioned his regret over giving up his rights and how he feels it's unfair that he doesn't get to know his biological child. He went on about the struggle with infertility and how devastated he is, saying that life robbed him of a chance to be a father and how he's ready to be part of her life. Reading his message, I felt a surge of emotions, anger, sadness, disbelief. But ultimately, it reinforced my decision. The tone of his message wasn't about my daughter. It was all about him and what he feels he was owed or deserved. It was clear that his intentions weren't motivated by love or genuine care, but by a sense of entitlement. He sees her as his last chance, but not because he has any real desire to be her father. In the end, I didn't respond. My daughter is happy, healthy, and loved, and I refused to jeopardize that for a man who chose to walk away when she was just a baby. My husband, who's been her dad in every way that matters, is fully supportive of my choice. Together, we agreed to be transparent with her as she grows older, sharing more information at an age-appropriate time so she can make her own choices in the future. My son is 17. I co-parent with my ex-wife, and I'm not married nor am I seeing anyone. I'm just focusing on work and providing for my son. My ex-wife, however, so far dated 3 guys who are just not nice. The third one, Anthony, or Tony, is a somewhat decent guy, but can act self-centered and is selfish in a lot of ways. He stated that he's not interested in being in competition to win my son over, and just wanted to be a positive role model in his life. I said why not as long as he's bringing positive influence. I work in a highly demanding job, and so I'm mostly absent from holidays, weekends, birthdays, etc. It's unfortunate, but my son understands and we're close enough spiritually, so that makes up for the distance. His birthday was days ago. I couldn't attend, but I already sent him a pretty cool, bit expensive wristwatch, and it was supposed to arrive 2 days before his birthday. I called my son to ask if he received it yet, and he said no. I was so confused I went to my ex-wife's house to inquire about this matter. She said they didn't receive anything, and Tony said the store must have gotten the wrong address and suggested I buy another watch from another store if I had no time and had work to take care of. I checked with the online store from which I bought the watch, and they assured me the watch was received and showed me proof, which was a signature allegedly from my ex's brother. My ex's brother swore he didn't receive anything, nor was at his sister's house at the time. I had a talk with the person who delivered the watch, and he described the guy as 5'4" with short hair and clean-shaven face wearing red t-shirt, and he said he was my ex's brother. I figured it was actually Tony. I told my ex, and she and him denied. I demanded to check the front door cam, and there he was, taking the watch and re-entering the house. My ex and my son were shocked. I mumbled, so much for a positive role model. Tony started shuddering, then said he was just keeping it for my son till his birthday. My son said he saw him wearing a new watch when going out, but couldn't outright confront him, and Tony obviously wasn't planning on giving it. I said he was really planning to steal my gift for my son, and he swore this wasn't the case. My son said he won't speak to him anymore. My ex and I just drove a wedge between my son and his stepdad by unjustly accusing him of stealing the watch, and now made my son hate him when I should have discussed this privately. I said my son deserves to know what his future stepdad did, and that he should have given the watch to my son the minute he received it. They insisted he was just keeping it. I later learned my son no longer wanted to spend his birthday with his stepdad and went to his grandparents to celebrate. My ex was livid, saying Tony got excluded from our son's birthday, and it's because of me, and demanded I clear the confusion. Am I the a-hole? Not the a-hole. How pathetic of a man to steal a birthday gift from a teenager. Not the a-hole. The guy stole your son's gift for himself. You did not drive a wedge between him and your son. He did that all by himself. Did he really think this would not get out? Your wife seems to be deep in denial if she really believes the story that her boyfriend was just keeping it for him, especially since you already told your son about the gift. The guy got caught in a series of repeated lies, including forging his brother's signature and lying that it had gotten delivered. This wedge between he and your son is of his own making, because he is a thief. Not the a-hole. You didn't drive a wedge between your son and his stepdad. He did. The truth would have obviously come out sooner or later, regardless of your intervention. It speaks volumes when the man claiming to be a positive role model for your son steals from him and then acts like the victim once caught. On a side note, I would advise against gifting anything to your son unless you can do it in person. Your ex taking his side means that her priorities are extremely backwards and would likely cover up a partner stealing things from your son in the future as well. I had what I can only describe as an awful pregnancy with my second child. I had hyperemesis gravidarum, dropped down to 44 kilos, was in and out of hospital, barely able to walk due to SPD, so I was not in the best headspace throughout the 9 months. I moved back in with my parents at 6 weeks so they could help with my first. The second was very much planned, but at around 12 weeks, his father asked if I'd have an A. I declined. At 15 weeks, he ended our marriage after I'd come home after an overnight stay on drips at the hospital. He apparently loved someone else, and that was that. The one thing I asked of him was that he didn't introduce his eldest to her before they'd been together 3 months, because there was already too much change happening in his life. Throughout the next 22 weeks, he dated and introduced 3 women to our eldest. He was unsupportive. I was left to pay for absolutely everything. He had our son for 5 hours on a Saturday until the last month when he started having him Friday through Sunday. When it came down to the labor, I told him I didn't want him there, and he was very angry about the whole thing. He was there when our first was born, and he didn't think it was fair he was being deprived of his child's first moments because he was still their parent. Where I might be the a-hole is that I didn't care about him seeing me vulnerable and exposed. Him being there would not have negatively impacted on me mentally. I simply didn't want to spend more time with him than absolutely necessary. So, am I the a-hole? Not the a-hole. He doesn't have any right to be in the room. It's an ex-husband. The only thing binding you together is your children, one of which will need looked after while they deliver the second. Not the a-hole. The audacity of this man. You don't get to demand access when your ex-wife, whom you cheated on, is giving birth to a baby you wanted to get rid of. Moreover, you are the one undergoing a medical procedure. Therefore, you get to decide who supports you. If you feel like he would negatively impact your delivery, that's that. Absolutely not the a-hole. He chose to leave. He chose another woman. Even if he'd stayed, it's still your body and your decision. Pregnancy is always scary, but especially with your situation, it's much more terrifying. Don't let him force you. I'm so sorry you have to share children with this man. I'm 4 years older than my brother Mark. I never got myself into trouble and was always a great student. I graduated and found myself a great job, a loving wife, and all I've dreamed of. Mark is doing good, all things considered, but he sure went the long way. When we got to high school, he would constantly hang with the wrong crowds and got himself in trouble very often. He barely graduated, and after that, his life went off the deep end. He flunked college, got himself dead-end jobs, and only got by with mine and my mother's help. He also got himself into D, though I don't know how bad. Still, all things considered, he was always a very good person, honest, and he never made excuses for himself. He was just lazy and had no direction in life. During this time, he was our extended family's black sheep, especially from our mother's side. Our Aunt Mary especially. Mary is very cool, but does act a bit pretentious. Her kids worshipped Mark, and when the stories about his life started going around, half of them were lies, she started putting some distance, but would talk to Mark the same as me when we did meet. Eventually, Mark turned his life around. I don't know what happened, but I know it was really bad. Long story short, he got himself clean. 1 year after that, he was unrecognizable. He was happy, extroverted, and pretty much left his old life behind. After 8 years, he was engaged, with a job and a future. Our family knows of this, and they're happy for him. Unfortunately, Mary never abandoned her old views. She occasionally puts him down because he never went to college and doesn't respect his job. Every time I visit, she likes to show me off as her lawyer nephew, but she never invites him or even mentions him. As far as her friends know, my mother has only one son. Mark knows this, and it hurts him. 2 years ago, Mary's daughter got married, and they planned this huge wedding. Both me, my wife, and my mother got invited, but not Mark. We didn't know how to handle this. We asked Mary's daughter why was Mark left out, and she admitted her mother didn't want him there because it would make them look bad. We decided to go without telling him so he wouldn't get hurt. He was never even aware Mary's daughter was getting married. Of course, eventually he found out when he saw pictures in social media. He was absolutely crushed. He confronted us and said that if we were family, we should have refused to go without him. I disagreed. We fought and he went no contact. To this day, my mother feels guilty about it. This was 2 years ago. A couple of weeks ago, my mother found out that Mark just had a kid and had introduced it to our other uncles. She was very hurt since she never even knew his partner was pregnant. She asked him why he didn't tell us about his child. His answer, "I love son. I will always be there for him, no matter what. I will not expose him to a family that will feel ashamed of him and turn him into a pariah because of some bad choices." Your brother was hurt enough to go no contact with you for 2 years after you showed him you didn't support him, and you're only now asking this? Yes, the a-hole, 7 ways from Sunday. Yes, the a-hole. You and your mother made your crappy choices, and Mark made his reasonable one. Not really getting why you wanted to celebrate with Mary, considering that she told you flat out she was embarrassed of your brother, who by then had already turned his life around. Guess you enjoy being the successful brother. Your brother is hurt. I don't blame him. Now, because no one in your family spoke up for him, you all are going to have to walk this out. To add insult to injury, his own family didn't have the personal courage to tell him, and he found out on social media. Then you wonder why he doesn't want to be bothered with you all. He turned his life around. Mary is judgmental, and everyone folds like a wet paper napkin for her. Jeez. If my son wasn't invited to a wedding because of something so lame, I wouldn't go, period. Yes, the a-hole, and so is your mother. I am 45 female, and I have a son, 28 male. My son is bi, and when he was around 16, he started dating his friend, who I'll refer to as X. My son and X were roommates at their boarding school. X's family lived in a different country, so he spent holidays with us. They were always together. I absolutely adore X, and so did my son. When they were 18, they moved in together, but around the time they were 21, they broke up. And not long after, X's parents both died. I reached out to him and offered my support, and we still catch up once every 2 weeks or so. As far as I'm concerned, I will be a mother to him. My son was very distraught after they broke up. I still sometimes think he hasn't completely recovered from it. There were a lot of complexities and pressure in their relationship. No fault to either of them. And it was hard enough having to watch them try to overcome it. Watching him come to terms with the fact that they couldn't was devastating. He knows I still talk to X, and he has never expressed he'd rather I didn't. There is an unspoken boundary where I will only talk about X if he asks. I've always invited X to family events, dinners, and holidays, and my son knows this. X didn't come for the first year or so, but now he joins us every Christmas and on my and my daughter's birthdays. My son dated after X, but has only had one serious relationship, the one he's in now. He's been seeing Y since December, and she's lovely. I've met her maybe 6 times, and they're talking about moving in together. My birthday is coming up this month, and my son had been asking about booking dinner reservations. I told him the number of people coming, and he got confused and asked why so many. I listed them all out, but he stopped me when I said X's name and asked if I was still going to invite him. I told him of course I was going to invite him. He always comes to birthday dinners. My son got really annoyed, saying it was inappropriate when he's bringing his new girlfriend. I told him he was being ridiculous and that it's really awful to imply that X is only considered family depending on my son's relationship status. I took the day to consider the conversation, and I could see where he was coming from. I didn't want it to be uncomfortable for Y, so the next night when we had them over for dinner, I privately took her aside and explained it to her. I let her know that she wouldn't be a bad person for being uncomfortable, and that I'd be willing to uninvite him if she wished. She told me that it was all very sweet, and she wouldn't be uncomfortable, that my son and X had years of dinners and holidays to get back together if they wanted, and they didn't, so she had no reason to be intimidated. We spoke to my son together about this, and he later blew up at me for meddling and told me he wouldn't come if X was coming. I really don't know what to think, so please put me in my place. Thank you. Edit. I just want to clarify a couple things. My son hadn't said he was uncomfortable with X going, only that he didn't know how Y would feel about it. Had he said he was uncomfortable, I would have uninvited X, no questions asked. It was also his idea to begin inviting X to family dinners and Christmas, etc. We eventually stopped asking, and X was just expected to be there. My son is also not paying for the dinner. I also see how I could have and probably did make Y feel cornered, and my son feel unheard. I will apologize to them both and talk to my son about it tomorrow. Not the a-hole. X has become a second son to you, and your son has had years to be okay with it. His new person sounds lovely, but if I was her, I'd probably be side-eyeing his reaction here. It doesn't make sense that he was okay with being around X for birthdays and holidays for the past 6 years, but isn't because of her. Yes, the a-hole. You put his girlfriend in such an awkward position, having to make a call about X coming to the meal. Your son had already expressed that he didn't feel comfortable with his ex there. That should have been enough, but instead you totally disrespected his boundary and tried to manipulate the situation to how you wanted it to be. Very selfish. No a-holes. Your son has a right to feel uncomfortable and worry for Y. You spoke to Y and explained everything, and she seems okay with the situation. It's your birthday, so it's natural that you would want to invite people you see every year on that date. All that being said, it does sound like your son is paying, and if that's the case, I think you would be an a-hole for still inviting X, because it's been made clear that your son is the one uncomfortable with this. That doesn't mean you can't still do something with X on that day or another. Update. I took my son aside yesterday morning and talked to him about the situation. I apologized for everything and told him I'd like to apologize to Y too when I see her next. He said it was okay, and we sat down and had a talk about X. My son said himself that he doesn't want X to be cut off, and said he'd like him to continue to come to Christmas and my daughter's next birthday, but it was too early in his relationship to be sitting Y down at a family dinner with his ex-boyfriend there. I made sure to let him know that if he were to change his mind at any time, that I would respect that, no questions asked. As for Y, my son did tell me that she had no problem having X there, that he was mainly worried about her hiding her true feelings because she didn't want to put anyone in an awkward situation. He apologized for not just being straight up with that at the beginning, and it was a really constructive conversation. We talked about ways to avoid the dinner altogether, and came up with that for my birthday, I will have a little weekend trip for myself instead of having a dinner. I canceled the dinner and started planning the trip, and he went out for the day. When he came back, he was really quiet and upset. I asked about it, and he told me that he broke up with Y, and that he doesn't want X at any more family functions, and then went into his caravan and hasn't come out since. I think a lot of you may be right. I shouldn't have ever reached out to X. I should have known better when my son was asking to have him invited. I just wanted everyone to be loved.